I enjoy musicals. Blending storytelling with music? Genius. And while I enjoy them, I'm very picky when it actually comes to musicals. Because, in all honesty, after a while they start sounding the same. Yesterday's main focus of music wasn't actually its originality, though. Most songs were just covers of the Beatles. And I would like to believe that anyone who's a fan of the Beatles would enjoy this movie, especially since in this universe all the Beatles lived to grow old. I'm pretty sure fans of the band had a pretty strong reaction when seeing a resurrected John Lennon on screen.
Fantastic. You made it to 78.
While I personally don't care about the Beatles because of my lack of interest in their music, I still had fun watching this movie. The concept was simple, but clever, and I have to give kudos to Jack Barr for coming up with the story, and actually getting a feature-length film made out of it, considering I'm pretty sure this idea has been in other people's heads before. Yesterday is simply a movie where a man wakes up in a world where the Beatles don't exist. The film is his story and how he climbs to fame by singing songs that don't exist in the world he woke up in. The visuals were pretty pleasing in this movie. And while I still enjoyed the movie, I definitely had a few problems with the story. At some parts, it just seemed a little slow. Maybe it was because of my lack of interest in the Beatles or the fact that I took too many breaks while watching this movie. But I do have to admit that most of the dialogue was charming.
You look like Ed Sheeran, you know.
I am Ed Sheeran.
All right. Well done.
Our main character Jack is amusing to follow, and his interactions with most characters are entertaining. But there's one major aspect that just didn't hit right with me. And when I checked back after watching this movie, I realized that this was labeled a romance musical. I personally don't think the romance part of this movie was delivered appropriately. I didn't even really register it was centered around romance till later in the film. While I did notice the chemistry between Jack and Ellie in the first half of this movie, towards the end, it seemed kinda rushed, especially since this movie spent more time on Jack's journey. I think if she was just simply more present in the movie, I don't think the romance would feel as forced as it was. But maybe it's just me, and the fact that I have a hard time sitting through a movie most of the time. Anyways, 6 out of 10, I don't know if I would watch this again. This is gonna be a dramatic shift into this next movie I'm talking about, but it's one movie that really impacted me, and I just really wanted to talk about it. I find it a little jarring that I can watch movies like The Purge or The Hunt and go through those movies almost completely unfazed. I love the movie for their concepts and how they're written. Deaths do draw a reaction from me, but nothing more than a quick hiss or comment, as I could only phantom being in those situations. Yes, some of these deaths are pretty gory, but most of the time the situation they're in isn't a situation that any of us will end up in, hopefully. And not to mention the fact, even though these movies take place in our world, it doesn't really base itself on true events, historical events. The Nightingale tells a story with the cruel history of humanity's past, or rather, inhumanity. And it's an extremely hard movie for most people to watch. Based in 1825, Claire, an Irish convict, goes on a journey of revenge after a British officer commits violent acts committed on her and her family. This was a similar description to what I read when I decided to watch this movie with some friends. I had briefly heard the reviews of this movie, hearing that it was brutal and violent, but I genuinely thought that they were being overdramatic. But I was wrong. Very wrong. And I have to say that this summary definitely does not give this movie justice, because I wasn't prepared for this movie at all. Claire's world is unraveled to the viewer as she starts her journey of revenge. But this revenge story is nothing like anything else you might be familiar with, because Claire isn't untouchable and obscenely badass compared to other examples of a woman on a quest for revenge. She's flawed and vulnerable as any other ordinary person. The first 20 minutes of the film is jarring, unsettling in every way possible, and as you progress through the movie, it gets uncomfortable and sickening. But that's the whole point of the movie, to show the audience our inhumanity in an era where our current social acceptable behaviors were non-existent. I am not afraid to admit this movie made me cry, several times, and it left me emotionally wounded for a couple days after. But even after that, I find this movie beautiful. Its characters, the dialogue, the cinematography, the choice of a lack of soundtrack, the story, and of course the message it conveys is all blended perfectly together. Its ending, the Nightingale's ending, will probably be one of my favorite conclusions to any story ever. It just seems undefeatable in comparison to anything else. It perfectly wraps up the experience you go through with our main characters, Claire and Billy. Their relationship, their character growth, their journey together is all perfectly concluded with a very raw and powerful scene. I honestly refuse to go into detail on what exactly happens because I just believe the ending doesn't deserve to be viewed unless you watch the entire film. Of course, this film isn't for everybody. It can be too much for anyone who's squeamish and faint hearted, and even the most tough hearted could squirm or flinch. But if you do decide to watch this movie, I recommend watching it with someone else. It's going to make the viewing a little easier, and I just think it's an experience worth to be spent with a person you trust or are comfortable with. Because once you finish this movie, you'll probably want someone's company, whether you have something to say or you're left speechless. I definitely have to rate this movie 10 out of 10. It's a very heartbreaking but emotionally impacting movie. I just want to thank everyone who's given me great feedback from my previous video, Elsa Anna. Even though you guys did it outside of YouTube, I don't really care, honestly. I just wanted to acknowledge you guys in this video. The next upcoming video I already have in mind. It's going to be about Avatar: The Last Airbender, thanks to a suggestion by Delaney Hill. If I said your name wrong, please forgive me, but I appreciate your comment. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Until then, be strange.